This is Phil Koopman with a tutorial on system-level testing. In this talk, we'll focus on the areas of acceptance test and software test, which are the last levels of testing before the product is released out into the field. System-level testing involves testing the entirety of the software system or the product to do one last check for bugs. It seems that Thomas Edison invented the term bug way back when, but the more popular story for the first famous bug has to do with a moth that was found inside a computer by Admiral Grace Hopper. Part of the story is that when they removed the moth from the computer, they taped it into the logbook, noting first actual case of a bug being found. The important thing about system test is that it's the last line of defense against shipping bugs. That means it should not be the first and only line, but rather the last time you have a chance to get rid of bugs. A system-level acceptance test emphasizes customer-type usage. In other words, would the customer accept this product as fit for purpose? The layer below that, called software testing in the V, emphasizes aspects not visible to the customer. For example, is the watchdog timer turned on and working? There's an issue here that the watchdog timer is never supposed to actually be activated in use, so there's no way from a customer point of view to actually test whether it works or not because it's never supposed to happen. Therefore, you need something additional, a little beyond what a customer would do to be able to activate that function. The anti-patterns for system-level testing are, first, if you see excessive defect escapes to field testing, in other words, bugs that are not found in testing but are found by customers, that tells you your system-level testing has a problem, and in that case, you probably have problems elsewhere as well. If the majority of system testing effort is ad hoc exploratory testing, probably that system testing is not adequate for an extremely high dependability system. If you have everyday quality software where you're just trying to provide the most testing in a short amount of time with limited budget, that might be a different story. But for highly dependable systems, you should not be doing primarily ad hoc exploratory testing at the system test level. Rather, it should be traced back to system level requirements. The third anti-pattern is acceptance testing is the only testing done in the system. You're skipping unit tests, you're skipping integration tests, you're skipping peer reviews. While you can eventually brute force sort of okay software quality that way, that's a sign that you're really taking the hard path. There are a lot more cost-effective things to do than system testing to improve your software quality. Effective system testing should not emphasize particular lines of code, but rather making sure that all the pieces work together as they're supposed to and the product actually does what the customer needs it to do. So there's a system test plan, and its metric of coverage is were all the requirements covered, not particular lines of code. Measuring coverage in particular requires making sure that every product requirement is tested. Ad hoc testing can help, but should not be the primary method because it's too easy to miss some obscure requirement that the customer is depending on to work. There can be some non-customer visible requirements that are also tested, especially non-functional requirements. For example, this might be the place where you make sure the system doesn't crash too often. And while it's difficult to measure the mean time between crashes, you might at least have a requirement saying we're going to put the system under heavy load and it has to operate for 2 weeks or 1 month without experiencing a crash. And we'll say, okay, that tells us that the crash resistance is pretty good. A thing that makes system testing much harder for embedded systems is that you need to deal with embedded system I/O. A lot of the times just putting the software in a virtual machine and letting it run against a test set up in the cloud doesn't do it because you need to actually deal with I/O problems as well. A technique commonly used to deal with this is to use a hardware abstraction layer and swap in some sort of I/O simulation to put it into a test simulator harness, but that has its limits. Eventually, you're going to have a room full of systems where you're letting them run to find the last few bugs that have to do with hardware interaction. That means embedded system testing can be expensive and time-consuming, especially if a person is required to press buttons or change environmental conditions to see how the system responds. Some extreme tests involve things like crashing the system in a physical way, which destroys the system. Those tests are expensive, they need to be carefully simulated, and you only get a few goes at them. So that's in sharp contrast to a pure software system where every time the system doesn't work, you fix the bug and you just try again with the test. While some development teams treat system testing as just a way to find bugs, that's probably not the best way to look at it. For a dependable embedded system, every bug found in system test should be a huge deal, because every escape to system testing partly means you missed this bug in all your other layers of the V, but also partly means that's a near miss. You almost shipped a bug to a customer. And the problem is, if you're finding a bunch of bugs in system test and you're only finding some of the bugs that are there, that means bugs are shipping to the customer. So generally, if you see more than a very small number, fewer than 5%, fewer than 1%, depends on your system, of bugs in system test, you can pretty much bet you're shipping important bugs out to your customer, and that's a problem. Instead, you should look at a bug found in system test as a process failure. So every time you find a bug in system test, you don't just fix the bug. You also go back and find out what's wrong with the process. That point is discussed more in the tutorial on testing. What you should be finding in system test is not a bad line of code. That should be found down in unit test. You should not be finding interface problems. That should be found in integration test. The few bugs you find should be system requirement defects that somehow made it past peer review and no one has noticed at this point. Usually they're the obscure edge cases of a bunch of requirements interacting in a way that is a bit of a surprise. Those are the only kinds of bugs you should be finding, and hopefully there aren't too many of them. It's tempting in system test when something weird happens to try again, and if it doesn't reoccur, you say, well, that's a one-off bug. There's nothing we can do about it. If you're seeing these types of bugs that just appear once in a while but are hard to reproduce, that's usually the tip of the iceberg for some process problems. For example, if you have race conditions, you're not going to see them very often in testing, and if you see even one, often that means you have race conditions all over the place and you just got lucky and happened to see one of them. So again, anytime you see a bug in system testing, you should be asking yourself why that happened, and if it's anything other than a very subtle requirements issue, probably you have a process failure and you should dig a lot deeper and be fixing more than that one bug. Saying that system testing should not be debugging, but rather a quality check on the software, is a different way of just recognizing the plain fact that product testing or any testing is not going to find all the bugs in your system. Product testing in particular is a very inefficient and ineffective way to find bugs in anything except perhaps top-level requirement issues. The fact of the matter is that testing bad software doesn't make it good, it just makes it less bad. If you have 1,000 bugs you find, you remove 1,000 bugs, and somebody says there's no bugs left, well, that's probably not true. All they really mean is there's no bugs left that they know how to find in product testing. The plain fact is there are too many different timing and sequencing combinations, failure types, and operational scenarios for testing to cover everything and find every bug. It's just not going to happen. This has been known for a really long time. There's some data from 1984 from IBM about how long it takes to see a fault when you operate a system. Now, this may sound like old data, but the importance here is back in the 1980s, IBM mainframe software was extremely dependable. So this data applies to software that has very, very few bugs found. And what they found was 1/3 of faults take more than 5,000 years to manifest, 5,000 machine years. And back in the 80s, there weren't that many machines, so that was a lot of time spent on running software and happening to find a bug. But even for your system, do you test for more than 5,000 years of use of the product? That might mean you have 1,000 products, you run them for 5 years. Or if you want 5,000 years and you only have a month of testing, that's a warehouse full of systems you're trying to run. And even that will only get you 2/3 of the bugs just by operating the system. So the lessons here are twofold. First is, this is just another piece of data for testing is not going to find all the bugs. And the other one is, if testing is your only plan for getting rid of bugs, probably your customers are going to regularly see bugs that you will never see during testing, because there may be only one of you and a warehouse that you can rent. But if you're building a product in quantity, there's a whole lot of customers accumulating a whole lot of use. So the rare things will show up for the customers that you're never going to see in testing. The lesson that should be learned from that is you need more than system and product testing to find the bugs. You need other plans. You should be using peer review, unit test, and so on, and those are other tutorials. To emphasize how important it is to be extremely thorough in system testing, and how hard it is to think of all the different details, let's consider the F-22 Raptor dateline incident. The F-22 at the time was the pride of the U.S. Air Force. It cost $360 million per aircraft. And in February 2007, the first deployment was made to Japan. They flew a half dozen aircraft across the ocean, across the dateline, to get to Japan. Fortunately, they had some tankers with them because when they crossed the dateline, the computers crashed. The planes had crashed computers, they had no navigation, they had no communications, they had no fuel management. The only thing that was still working was the fly-by-wire system. So they were able to fly, but they couldn't communicate, they couldn't do anything else. They were able to visually follow the tankers back to Hawaii, and they got lucky. They were able to have enough fuel that they could land. If there had been poor visibility or something had gone wrong, the pilots would have had to eject and they could have lost all 6 aircraft. The cause was said to be, well, quote, it was a computer glitch in the million lines of code. Somebody made an error in a couple lines of code and everything goes. Well, that's a pretty standard problem with embedded systems, which is why we worry about quality so much. Now, should they have found that in system testing? Well, it turns out there was a related kind of problem seen in the F-16 in earlier years. And the F-16, originally, when it would cross the equator, it would flip upside down and fly inverted. That was said to be found in simulation. Now, there's some question about whether this is an urban legend or not, but pretty much any aircraft designer who did this kind of testing had heard about the F-16 crossing the equator. And so they should have been thinking about things like geographic issues. They should have been thinking about the dateline if they were thinking about the equator, but somehow they got past them. And this was a real world incident that fortunately did not result in loss of life, but could have gone south pretty easily. Think about all the weird edge cases your system is going to see and make sure you hit them in system testing. Another consideration in system testing is what you do with the bug reports. Sure, you want to fix bugs, but you can often mine the data to actually get more value out of it. And one of the big things you can do in system testing is find bug farms. The 90-10 rule applies to bug farms. 90% of the bugs are in 10% of the modules, at least in a lot of different software that I've heard about. Typically, you're going to find the bugs in the modules with high cyclomatic complexity, lots of global variables, spaghetti code, and so on. But the bug farms can be more than just bad code. If you have a bad design, just a poorly thought out design, it may be impossible to write code for it no matter how good the coder is. And that could be partly complexity, but it could just be because it's a poorly conceived design. It may be too complex to understand and test. It may be the design is so complicated no one can even figure out how to write code for it. Or maybe it's poorly defined, the interfaces are confusing, and so on. So generally, the idea is to take all the bugs you find and throw up a histogram and say, all right, for each module I found this many bugs. And it's common to find a handful of modules with huge numbers of bugs compared to all the other modules. Those are your bug farms. When you find the handful of modules that always have the bugs, you shouldn't just keep fixing bugs because probably you'll never fix all of them. They're just not fixable. Instead, you should be refactoring the module, redesigning the interface. Often, the smartest thing to do is to take the bug farm modules and just throw them away and redesign that piece, often breaking them up into smaller, more well-considered modules. And now, partly for fun, but also because there's a message here, let's do the top 10 risks of poor embedded software quality. Number 10, your module fails unit test, tie with number 9. Number 9, a bug is found in peer review, tie with number 10. Hopefully this is where you're finding all the bugs. Number 8, the system fails integration or software testing. Number 7, the system fails acceptance testing. Now at this point we've gotten out of the V, and this is where the bugs really start being a huge problem instead of a moderate problem. Number 6, you get a field problem report and it gets put into the backlog. Number 5, your boss wakes you up at 2 a.m. because a big customer is offline and all the executives in your company are scrambling to not lose this huge contract that could kill your company. Number 4, you get an airplane ticket to a war zone and you get to install the software update by reflashing the system that's deployed in some military base. Number 3, you hear about the bug on social media and it's not from your friends. Number 2, The corporate lawyers ask you to testify in the lawsuits involving the software defect in the product you designed. And the number one worst way to find a bug? The reporters who are camped outside your house on your lawn ask you to comment on it as you come out your front door on your way to work. System test best practices first and foremost involve testing all the system requirements to make sure the system does everything it's supposed to do, but also to look at fault management responses, performance, extra functional requirements such as dependability and speed, and other aspects of the system that are hard to assess when you have something less than the entire system in front of you. The picture on the right shows a military jet engine undergoing test. Those tests are essential. They prove that the product's really going to work, but they're very expensive. They take a long time to schedule. They involve a lot of people. You really want those tests to pass essentially all of the time. And so before you get to system test, you want to be doing the other types of testing to make sure that when the big day to turn the system comes on, it's just going to work. There's an important difference between system test, otherwise known as acceptance test, and software test. System acceptance test is from the customer point of view. The point there is that you are trying to make sure the product works, and the people doing the test have to have a lot of domain skills. They have to know how a jet engine works, or how a thermostat works, or how a compressor works. On the other hand, software testing is all about the internal test interfaces. Remember the example about the watchdog timer. Software testing is your last chance to get things right before you're spending the money to do the large-scale and expensive product tests. And that uses internal interfaces to get at parts of the software that are just impractical to get at through normal product testing. The biggest system testing pitfall is somehow assuming you're going to get high software coverage on a system test. It's not going to happen. You're not going to find all the bugs. It'll be essentially impossible to activate all the exception handling and all the edge cases deep down inside the software. You should be finding those things in unit test or perhaps integration test. System test should be just making sure everything really works the way you expected. The other system test pitfall is that if you have a lot of fault management, for example, a hardware component is broken and your software has to deal with it, testing that at the system level is really difficult because now you have to start breaking pieces of hardware. And if you haven't designed your system to make it easy to test fault response, you're going to find out you really can't test it. That's usually solved by having some way to simulate hardware faults down in the software so you can test the fault management for the most part purely in software, and then just do a few sanity checks once you're at the product level to make sure that that software testing was complete and accurate.